Hi, my name is Juan Estrella and I will explain the chapter 20. Importance of verifying legal and legislative requirements when securing information. Well, in the first image, we will talk about the potential single points of takeover. So another principle is to focus on potential single points of takeover. Companies often control many individual firewalls through a single firewall policy server. If an attacker takes over of the firewall policy server, there is no end to the damage that he or she can do. The central firewall policy server is a potential single point of takeover, which means that if an attacker can take it over, they gain control over a significant portion of your network. And in the image is just an example of how companies usually usually cannot and do not want to eliminate potential single points of failure. So having a central firewall policy server greatly improves a company control over its firewalls, eliminating inconsistencies, sorry, and reducing management costs. Eliminating this single point of failure by going back to configuring firewalls individually is not an answer to the threat. Rather, it's critical for companies uh, to identify all the single points of takeover and harden them very well against attacks. Uh, well, in the next image, it's about the policy-based security. So, well, before to explain a more detail about this one, we want just to focus on the policy-based security. So we have discussed the importance of security planning and major importance principles. So now we will look at how plans are implemented in well-run organizations. First, the access control. Access control is if attackers cannot get access to the resources, they cannot exploit it. So access control is limiting who may have access to each resource and limiting his or her permissions when using the resources. The second is authentication versus authorizations. Authentication is a proof of identity, and authorizations is a permission. Permissions a particular authorized user is given with other resources. Just because a user is authenticate does not mean that he or she will be permitted to do everything. And finally, the principle of least permission. Give each authenticate user only the minimal permissions he or she needs to do his or her job. Cannot do unauthorized things that will compromise security. So, okay, now in this image, this is a preparation of policy from implementation permits the implementers to carry out the policy in the best way of particular situation. So, policymaker uh, should have superior overview knowledge. However, implementers, these parts, implementers know about specific technologies and the local situation. They have the specific knowledge that policymakers do not, including technical knowledge. Unless they are given the latitude of use this knowledge, weak implementation is likely to doom the policy's effectiveness. So, separating policies from implementations prevents senior security professionals from micromanaging operating level people inappropriately. And the separation of policies from implementation uses the strength of both policy makers of implementers. So as you can see, it's just a fast example that how the policy what we can do. So there is two things that we can do is implementation like standards and guidelines, or just oversight like is auditing, reading log files on vulnerability testing. So any of these choice, we can just do the second implementation that how to do it. And finally, we want an effective protection. Finally, in this part is centralized management is also important in security management. For example, a company may have dozens or even hundreds of firewalls on its network. It would be easy to accidentally misconfigure a few of these firewalls to ignore individual access control rules. So in this image, show central firewall management uh, 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 designing to prevent such oversights. So the firewall administrator creates a high-level access policy firewalls to implement. So in that part, in this image, sorry, the firewall policy being implemented is that any IP address not in the account department may access uh, any other external web server, only this one. So many companies allow open access to external web servers for most IP addresses. And this security administrator has decided that open access is good, but that it should not extend to hosts within the account departments. So, for example, okay, just let me. So, for example, accounting cannot access to a marketing or even for border department. Uh, so so it then pushes these rules out of all the company. Sorry. For example, maybe okay, sorry. Separating firewall policies from firewall rules is an example of policy-based security. So the firewall administrator sets high-level policies. The firewall policy servers does the work needed to convert this policy into individual firewall rules. The firewall policy server will not make a human mistake like forgetting to configure a particular firewall. So, uh, sorry. If there is a question about a particular firewall rule on a particular firewall. So furthermore, the the firewall administrator can ask what policy it implements. Policies are usually easier to understand than specific firewall rules. Okay, thank you.